Okay, so I'm going to talk about a report that the Place Alliance produced and published back in the autumn called Home Comforts. And well, as we all know, we've been living in a very strange world this almost a year. And we, because of COVID, we, for the first time ever, had a lockdown back in March. And we all had to start working in our homes and our local neighbourhoods. And those functions that we used to do in separate places, work, school, home and leisure, all came together, or most of them came together in those local environments and with our local communities. We then had a period when there was a gradual release over the summer, and then a tightening again from September, and then lockdown again. And we never really got out of it because we're back in full lockdown now, as of course you all know. And during that time, as I've said, we've had to get used to events like this today, not just for special activities like this, but for all of our day-to-day activities and staying in touch with family and so forth. And all of this has taken a toll on us in many different ways, on our mental and physical health. Domestic abuse has been up, on our happiness and well-being have suffered as well. And what this particular piece of research attempted to do was to look at our homes and our neighbourhoods and to stress test those, to use the very strange period of lockdown as a way of testing how they are performing, not just in lockdown, but also hopefully in a post-COVID world, to learn some lessons from lockdown for the post-COVID world. Ultimately, we may never entirely return to the way it was before. Many of us may choose to stay at home and work from home much more if we have that option. Our high streets may never recover in the same way as they were pre-COVID. So this piece of research was based on a short targeted survey, which happened during May and June last year. And it was a combination of open and closed questions. We got 2,500 responses, which was quite amazing, really. Reflects the fact that so many people perhaps were at home and wondering what to do during that period. So they decided to fill out our survey. And we started that survey with asking a series of about you questions to get a sense of who it was that was responding to us. And we also wanted to test the bias of the survey, because inevitably we started off by contacting our professional groups and so forth. And we wanted to ensure that it wasn't just people like us who were responding to the survey, but it broadly reflected the full gamut of people living across the UK. And in fact, when we looked at these about you questions and we compared them with national averages, in many respects, the survey responses did reflect the national average in terms of house types and neighbourhood types and tenure types and standards of space in the home and occupancy and so forth. But there was also certainly a London bias, and I think a white collar experience is reflected in the findings. What did we find? Well, in terms of our homes, most people, fortunately, were pretty comfortable during the first lockdown, but there were still millions of uncomfortable people. So about two-thirds of people said they were comfortable. About a sixth, that's the equivalent of almost 11 million people across the UK, said they were uncomfortable in their homes during that period. People in houses fared better than those in flats, and the higher those flats were, those apartment blocks were, the less comfortable they were during lockdown. And perhaps of greater concern, maybe, the newer the dwellings were, the least comfortable they were. So dwellings got progressively less comfortable as the decades passed by. Key workers were least comfortable. And this might seem perverse because many of those key workers, of course, were still going out to work. But I think it reflects, more that those key workers came more from the sort of blue collar categories rather than the white collar categories. And social renters seem to suffer the most. Tenure was the strongest predictor of comfort or discomfort in the home. Owner-occupiers were the most comfortable, social renters the least. So why were some less comfortable than others? Private open space seems to be critical, access to private open space. That was the strongest design-based comfort predictor. So those with a private garden were the most comfortable, and they were more comfortable than those with a terrace space, who were more comfortable than those with a private balcony, who were more comfortable than those with a shared garden, and they were more comfortable than those who didn't have any of the above, who were least comfortable of all. Perhaps unsurprisingly, more space in the home meant more comfort. Those with more than 5 occupants at home were the least comfortable in the survey. Most, but not all, were able to work comfortably from home. About 7% really struggled, and those were certainly concentrated within the social renting category. Internal design had an impact. There seemed to be a broad preference for greater degree of cellularity than perhaps we've asked for in the recent past in our home design. And basic environmental conditions in the home are really important: fresh air, daylight, noise insulation, and so forth. Perhaps unsurprisingly, we all want more. Even those who had good space standards in the home and access to a private garden wanted more. They wanted bigger, they wanted better. So keys to success in this category were access to a private garden. As this person says, they became gardeners in training during the first lockdown. And access to those space standards in the home. This person had an Edwardian house with plenty of space to spread out. What about neighbourhood? What did the survey tell us about neighbourhoods? Well, again, most of us, in fact, even more of us were comfortable during the first lockdown, which is positive. About 4% said they were particularly uncomfortable, and it was a problem with the way that their neighbourhood was designed. About 4%, which doesn't sound much, but it's still almost 3 million people across the UK. That would be the equivalent of. Urban was just as good as rural and suburban. It wasn't a strong predictor of comfort or rather satisfaction with the neighbourhood. But high-rise came out poorly. So neighbourhoods comprising houses were markedly better off than those with apartment blocks, and the higher those apartment blocks, the less happy people were with their neighbourhood. Again, newer neighbourhoods came off worse, the same as for houses. And so the newer the neighbourhood was, the less satisfied people were. And owner-occupiers were, again, the happiest with their neighbourhoods as they were with their houses, with private renters, followed by social renters. What we found is that neighbourhoods, even those with great quality neighbourhoods, that didn't entirely compensate for those people who had real space problems or particular issues with the quality of space within the home. So green, mixed use, less traffic and connected neighbourhoods seem to be the key factors. Proximity to a park within 5 minutes was the strongest predictor of satisfaction with neighbourhoods. Over 10 minutes led to dissatisfaction. And the same was the case for access to local facilities, shops and other services. Again, if people were within 5 minutes, then they were generally pretty satisfied with their neighbourhood. Over 10 minutes, their satisfaction dropped off markedly. So there was a lot of discussion during lockdown about a 15 and 20 minute neighbourhood. We found that people really hanker after a 5 or 10 minute neighbourhood. Space for walking, cycling and quieter streets, people very much prized during the lockdown period and wanted that to persist afterwards. And people saw COVID in that sense as an opportunity that we needed to learn from what people were enjoying within their homes, and we need to learn and apply those lessons after COVID has passed. So keys to success: larger areas of green open space close to people's homes, and also access to local shops and facilities for people that don't drive, and people should be able to walk or cycle to those places. What about communities? This was the third and final area that we asked respondents to get back to us on. And we first of all, we asked them about their pre-COVID experience of community. Most people felt there was some rudimentary feeling of community. About 2/3 felt it was tangible but weak. It was a stronger sense of community in rural areas, stronger sense of community the closer people were to the ground, a stronger sense of community in older areas rather than newer areas, and churn tended to reduce communities. So in this area, private renters came off worse because there was a greater churn in that sector, we think. So they felt a least sense of community. Now, COVID, as we heard in the newspapers, seemed to boost community feeling. But what we found is that wasn't equal. That boost was not equal all communities. So community seemed to have helped most people through the various lockdowns. And that was felt most keenly by those who were at home and not working, particularly by older sections of the community. But community builds community. So all types of dwelling in neighbourhoods saw an increase in community feeling, but a much stronger, those places that had a much stronger pre-existing sense felt that was reinforced the most during lockdown. So those that had already had a strong sense of community felt it boosted more than those who had a weak. And higher, newer, and social came off worse in this category as well, saw the smallest boost. Silver lining, respondents reported that people did seem friendlier within their community and the environment seemed to recover during the periods of lockdown. So many people saw positives within the community, that they were able to spend more time and get to know even their family better during that time, but also get to know their neighbours and their community better as well during the first lockdown. Of course, it may be different in this lockdown that we're currently in because this is the winter lockdown and people are not using their external space so much as they were perhaps within the first one. Some people saw negatives. This person complaining about an increase in people using their local parks and facilities, and this person obviously enjoyed using them with less people around, and when they were all at home, that made it less comfortable for that particular person. And people within London and higher density areas tended to suffer the most. Had a particular problem and really hankered after having a more social lifestyle outside of the home. So the report finished with a set of recommendations. I'm not going to go through all of these now, just highlight a few of them. In terms of the home, all new homes and newly converted homes should be built to mandated access to private open space, even if just to a balcony, and also decent space standards within the home. Now, there has been some movement within government on this, and that's to be welcomed. And certainly, but we need also to think about those environmental conditions within the home as well: fresh air, access to daylight, insulation, noise insulation, and so forth. At the neighbourhood scale, the higher and denser we build, the greater the need for those high quality parks and green spaces and local facilities within the neighbourhood. We absolutely mustn't forget that. And we should aspire for a 5 or 10 minute neighbourhood. And then finally, social housing should certainly enjoy the same essential amenities as housing for sale or private rent, including access to those sorts of local amenities and facilities that I've already mentioned. So the report can be downloaded if you're interested in the full glorious detail at our Place Alliance website, placealliance.org.uk. Thank you very much for listening to me. I will hand back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Matthew. It seems like the Swedes are ahead of the game again with the 1 minute city. Yeah, I think it's some great takeaways there. I look forward to discussing it in the chat.